Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is American war correspondent, veteran war correspondent, Phil Ittner. He's in Kyiv, Ukraine, via YouTube and video blog or whatever it is, the magic of the internet. His Twitter handle, if you want to follow him on Twitter, is Philip Ittner. It's spelled Philipittner, with the little at sign in the front of it. And Phil, welcome back. It's been 2 weeks since we talked.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a while. Yeah, and lots happened.
Yeah, we took a week off for the holidays, and sure. I know that you were there during the Russian assault. Well, I mean, you've been there through the whole thing, right? But the Russian assault on New Year's Eve, I understand, was particularly grotesque. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, and horrifying and terrifying. I mean, and that was the intent, to terrify. There was no military objective to what was done on New Year's Eve. And Tom, you have to understand that in the former Soviet space, New Year's Eve is not kind of like how we celebrate New Year's in the West, because during the entire period of the Soviet Union, they tried to lump everything that is in the holidays that is religious onto New Year's Eve. Because, of course, the communist regime was secular. So for many, many people, the highlight of the year is New Year's Eve. That is the biggest celebration of the year. And the Russians know it just as well as anybody else in the former Soviet space. And to choose that day of all days to have a sustained, regular attack on the civilian population, not even the infrastructure. I myself was under fire on New Year's Day. New Year's Eve, rather, sorry. Starting in the very early hours of the morning, drones were coming in regularly. Anti-aircraft fire was going off regularly, much more sustained every 20 minutes, maybe every 90 minutes. Those were kind of the intervals. But the munitions that were coming in, either they were cruise missiles or they were drones, mostly drones. They were coming into a civilian part of Kyiv, the very center of the city. There is no electrical substations here of note. There's no power plant here. Even if you were to argue that those are legitimate targets because they affect command and control or what have you, none of that was the case on Saturday. I have been attacked by the Russians before in Odessa. They used a hypersonic missile while I was there. After the Ukrainians had a successful attack on an oil rig platform that was owned by the Russians, they sent a symbolic attack with a hypersonic missile. But I have never been through anything like what I went through on New Year's Eve. It was purposeful. And the only intent was to terrify the population. It was an act of terrorism.
So how did the population respond to this? What did you hear as you were walking around the streets of Kyiv, in the following days?
Well, being the darn fool that I am, of course, I have the responsibility of actually covering these things. So I did not myself go into the air raid shelters, but I was aware of what was happening. I saw people streaming into the underground areas to get into shelters. I've subsequently seen photos of what it was like, people singing, people doing, impromptu New Year's Eve celebrations. Suddenly, champagne bottles were being popped with new friends who just happened to be in the air raid shelter with them. For myself, I stayed out because I wanted to photograph it. I wanted to document it. So, but in the subsequent days, what I have heard from the Ukrainian people about the attack on New Year's Eve is absolute anger, just deep-seated anger, because they knew the Russians and the Ukrainians speak a similar language because they have been tied together for centuries. And so not only do they both speak, the Slavic languages that are so easily mixed between Russian and Ukrainian, but of course most Ukrainians do speak fluent Russian. They were communicating amongst themselves about how, what you're doing is attacking us on the biggest day of the year, and we know why you're doing it. You're not doing it for a tactical reason. You're not doing it for a military reason. You're not even trying to deprive us of heating or electricity. You are sending a message that we will attack you on the most important holiday of the year, and we know what it means, and it's a communication saying we don't care about you. We will terrorize you, we will intimidate you, we will attack you for no good reason except to make you bow to the power of Moscow. And the reaction here has been the complete opposite. They are furious. There's a lot of anger about what happened on New Year's Eve. Currently, there is apparently a ceasefire being proposed by Vladimir Putin for Eastern Orthodox Christmas, 36 hours cessation of hostilities that has been announced from the Russian side. And the Ukrainian side has already started to say, look, we know what you did on New Year's, and you want us to respect your religious holiday, your Eastern Orthodox holiday, which, by the way, many Ukrainians are trying to break away from the Russian Orthodox Church.
Right. That's January 6th.
But they said it will be January 6th.
Yeah.
No, sorry, January 7th. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
The ceasefire will begin on the 6th. According to the Russians, this is a unilateral Russian decision that the Ukrainians have yet to recognize. And the reason I bring it up is because of this very point, is that if you were going to attack us on this day, which we all in the post-Soviet space recognize as one of the most important days of the year, then we're not sure whether or not you're being honest and in your intentions of declaring a ceasefire. Now, they'll certainly, I suspect, take it. The Ukrainians will be happy not to be shot at for 36 hours during that Eastern Orthodox holiday. But there's a certain amount of resentment in that, oh, now you're going to recognize your holiday, but this very important holiday we just went through New Year's Eve, you violated by attacking us. So it's the reaction to what happened on New Year's Eve and the continued reaction of the people here as we're ending the holiday season. This is really the last. There is a on the Julian calendar, which the Eastern Orthodox observe, there is also another holiday after Christmas, but it's minor. So we're really wrapping up the holiday season. And as we wrap it up, the sense of anger and animosity and frustration and also defiance by the Ukrainian people, I have not witnessed it diminishing in the least.
I'm guessing there would also be a concern that the Russians, if a ceasefire was observed by both sides, would exploit that ceasefire and use that opportunity to move troops and supplies in ways that they might not do if they thought they might come under fire.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing about it is that, Russia and Ukraine have really been at war since 2014 and the initial seizure of Donbass and Crimea. Right. The Ukrainians know their enemy very, very well. And the Russians have repeatedly broken ceasefires, broken truces, said they weren't going to do anything. And then, of course, we find out later that really what they were doing is taking a breather to reorganize their attack posture. There's very little trust from the Ukrainian side when it comes to what the Russians do, and that's born out of continued violations that the Russians have done. Not to say that the Ukrainians have been choir boys. This is a war, and but I would feel comfortable in saying that the larger proportion of violations of ceasefires, treaties, agreements, what have you, has been on the Russian side of the equation.
Right. And if there is a violation of this ceasefire by the Ukrainians, that will probably be immediately exploited by the Russians, A, for military purposes, and B, for propaganda. Exactly.
Oh, the propaganda-wise, the Russians are almost taunting the Ukrainians into attacking on Orthodox Christmas, because if they do, they can turn around to their population and see what we're dealing with here. Right. These are unreasonable people. We gave them a ceasefire, and they attacked us on our ceasefire. Right. It's all disingenuous. It's really meant to gain an advantage. Sure. During this holiday period. So.
We're talking with Phil Ittner, the American veteran war correspondent who has been in Kyiv, Ukraine through this entire thing and is still there reporting to us live from there. Phil, I'm going to hit a break here that I can't control in a minute and a half or so.
I'm glad to see you in 2023.
Well, thank you. No, we still have about a minute and a half, and
sure.
So I was just wondering if there's other things that you wanted to share with us that, it's been, like I said, 2 weeks since we talked.
It's been 2 weeks. I think the other major event that we saw was an attack on a barracks out in Donbass, in Donetsk. That was, for some reason, the Russians decided to quarter these new conscripts that they have. We don't know exactly how many, but it's comfortably in the hundreds. They were billeted at a facility that was either adjacent or directly connected to where they were also storing munitions. So when a HIMARS missile came in and struck this facility, it was a massive explosion. And even the Russians themselves, now they're downplaying it, saying it's around 100 that were killed. But again, sourcing from Russia is dubious at best. It was a huge blow in that they had to even admit it themselves. And then as we're finishing up here is also I urge anybody who's interested in seeing kind of how bizarre things have gotten within Russia, within Moscow, that on the first channel there, you can search for it on YouTube, the New Year's celebrations that was broadcast nationwide within Russia it's almost like cabaret. It's a very bizarre, surreal event where they're desperately trying to avoid that they're at war, but still recognize that they're at war. But of course, they're the heroes in the narrative, and it's bizarre kitsch and defiance with this gallows humor. It's garish.
Projecting normalcy.
Desperately trying to project normalcy, and this is a New Year's like any other. We're gonna have dancing, we're gonna have champagne, bubbles, and there happen to be soldiers here who we will venerate and all the rest of it, and we'll also insult and defy the West, of course, because that's their narrative that the West is the aggressor here. It's very surreal. It's very bizarre. I recommend people to take a look at it because it gives you an insight into how kind of bizarre the state of mind is in Russia.
Well, thank you, Phil Ittner, PhilIttner on Twitter. Phil, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom. Always a pleasure.
Yeah,
anytime.
And I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Remarkable. So what happens if they never pick a speaker? Well, at least some people are arguing it might be a good thing. I'll tell you about that after the break.